Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, Season 6. Let's see what happens.
I just want you to understand where I'm at. I want you to understand where I'm at because I haven't went out in 3 months. So
Either have I.
Exactly. But like I can't speak to you. I can speak to what I want.
My friends, I say, hey, you know what? I'm really in the process.
Yeah, he's still trying to rationally argue his points. He believes that she will understand logic. I mean, well, she understands logic, but that he believes she'll be convinced by it. But she's spinning out of control, and the way she interprets these conversations, because she'll talk about it later, is he's not a good communicator. You know, in the previous fight when they were making up on the bed, she said, you're a terrible communicator, or something. I can't remember the phrase, but she says, oh, you're terrible. And I would say he is superior. Yeah, I mean, imagine Clay in his shoes. So he's doing pretty well, and he doesn't have triggers. Like there's, in terms of what we've seen, he doesn't present a lot of reasons for her to be triggered. So, I mean, just think about the quote unquote triggers that, well, they're not quote unquote. Just let's review the triggers. Well, I guess the first trigger was, I think could be triggering to a lot of people. He's drunkenly talking about how hot AD is. I still contend that conversation, the beginning of that conversation was edited out, because I have a hard time believing Jimmy just offers that up without her, priming the pump somehow. You could call me biased for Jimmy, I don't know, but given Jimmy's pattern, he's not the sort that would just take a left turn in a conversation and just be like, oh my God, she is so stacked. Like, maybe, I don't know him. Maybe he's a D-bag, I don't know. But anyway, point is that it's important to remember this stuff, that you can't argue. There's no way out of it. The only possible thing, and I said this during their last fight, that I think he could do is just really not say much at all and just say, hey, I'm with you and I'm sorry. And I want you to know that I love you. I've done this sort of work at couples, and I love you. I mean, well, if they were in therapy, there would be all these procedures of emotional regulation, checking in with your distress level, awareness of your tendency to spin out, signs of spinning out. But at the very least, what he could be doing right now is just saying, hey, I'm sorry. I'll think about it. And I see that you were hurt by that. Is that what I'm hearing? Okay. Well, I do not want to hurt you. Instead of trying to argue the point, I imagine for a lot of people in the audience would say, well, of course he's saying those things. He deserves to say those things, and he does. But if he wants this relationship to work, which I think he does, you can't get into it like the way you would argue about like what sort of restaurant you should go to. Well, we went to pizza last night, so let's not go to pizza. And you like to go to taco places, let's go there. It's not you're not debating with someone that is speaking verbatim what they mean. Like, she's saying a lot of, if you just sort of catalog everything she's saying, it's all over the place. What is it? What's the problem exactly? And then she lands on, well, I just don't want to be with someone that leaves the house for an hour and has one drink with their friends at their birthday party. I don't want to be with someone like that. I don't want someone to be out and for someone else to see you and have them call me and question me on what's happening. I don't want that to happen.
This shit, I'm really trying to dive into this man, and you don't give two shits. Babe.
You don't think that I care about you? Just
yeah. And I think it's getting worse. And I think she knows that she crossed a bit of a line there. I can usually see that on her face when she extends, and then I think there's a part of her that's like, oh. But I doubt she'll apologize. But the other element that I've been saying from the very beginning is if you're in his shoes, because he doesn't exhibit it very much. He did during the last makeup when they are on the bed, but it's very hurtful. It's very painful to be on the receiving end of this. I mean, forget about if it's abusive or not, because of course that would be very hurtful and worrisome. But to have your partner that you have loved and invested time in and showered with affection, to have them over what seems to be like nothing, to have them just say, well, what phrase did she say?
I'm really in the process of this shit. I'm really trying to like dive into this man, and you don't give two shits.
Right. You don't give two shits. And maybe he doesn't, but I think he does. And to put all this effort and to commit to someone, to put a ring on her finger and make plans to marry, introduce her to the family, and you've done nothing wrong. The only thing we can point to is that he commented about AD's body. And, you know, if we want to say that was a wrong thing, then that's one wrong thing. But in the vast catalog of interactions that they've had, to characterize that whole thing, from choosing her over Jessica, from asking her to marry him, to all the kisses and the loves and putting up with the previous fights, forgiving her without her apologizing, to characterize that as not giving a shit about me or this relationship. At the very least, it's demoralizing. You know, it's sort of like you work hard at your new job, you're working, and your boss comes over and just says, well, you're lazy. Have you done any work today? And you're like, I did all these things. Well, that's not much. You feel like, well, what's the point? Why am I even putting effort into this thing? So at the very least, but more fundamentally, you just feel like you're nothing. You feel like you don't matter. You feel like, well, over time, you start to be gaslit into thinking, I guess I am that sort of person. I'm not a good partner. I deserve to be yelled at. It can be very, very hurtful. And I guess as a side note, little tip, don't say stuff like that to your partner unless you're sure that it's healthy or helpful to say. I can't imagine a situation where it would be, but those kinds of statements will come out of people's mouths, and it's like, what do you want the other person to do? Now, maybe you have a partner that actually doesn't care at all, and you're breaking up with them or something, then okay. But just because it feels like that doesn't mean that it is that, and sure doesn't mean you should be saying it, because once it's out there, I mean, this could be the turning point for his love. This is the third time, like we saw with Nick and Danielle, this could be the fight where the flame finally gets snuffed out.
Babe.
You don't think that I care about you just because I want to go out and like have one drink just to make an appearance for a friend and come right back?
That's not the kind of person I want to be with. Is that the kind of person you are? Because it's not the person I want to be with.
Yeah. And his face is not promising for her. His face looks like resigned. You know, the fact that I think in the first fight, he would have been more like, wait, what? Because in the first fight, he was assuming that she would be coming from potentially a rational place, a place that made sense. You know, when your partner says something like that to you, you're like, wait, am I missing something? Did I do something? I think that's where he's operating at first. I think he's been through it enough times now where he's like, really? He kind of has that look on his face, which I said is not a good sign for the relationship.
It's not. If that's what you want, I can't. Like,
the life I described to you is the life.
It's not the life I'm getting, though. I love you, and I want to be around you, but like.
And as a typical pattern for them, and I will say it coincides with the abusive cycle, that as the intensity increases and the victim is pleading and trying to accommodate the abuser, but eventually the victim will just give up or be demoralized or want a distance, and then the abuser will start to be nice, even in the, sometimes the cycle is framed as like over a number of weeks, but it can happen in the span of just a few minutes. So I'll rewind this, not because I know that it's happening here, but because the way that this cycle is often depicted in the media and on Twitter and stuff is it's one particular profile, perhaps the easiest profile to identify. But in my experience, the vast majority of abusive relationships don't look anything like the typical profile or the common profile that is proposed. Meaning that it's almost always a man that's beating a woman, and it's always violent, and then she's black and blue, and she is at her wit's end, and someone sees her bruises, like her mom, and then her mom says, "What's going on?" And then the victim's like, "I don't know," and then the mom says, "It's abusive. You need to get out of it," and then the wife starts to kind of distance a little bit and maybe even moves out temporarily, stays with the mom. That's when the abuser will suddenly be nice. The flowers and the forgiveness. I'm going to therapy. I'll never do it again. Okay, so that happens, but that's, in my experience, not a common case of what I see in my office. I did treat perpetrators that were like that, but even the ones that were convicted, they might have even had a moment like that, but in the day-to-day abusive cycle, it wouldn't always look that obvious. And so this is an example of what it could look like where it's not that typical profile, but let's...
If that's what you want, I can't.
The life I described to you is the life...
It's not the life I'm getting, though. I love you, and I want to be around you, but
And she's done this before. I don't know, I probably didn't mention it, but it's an example. I don't know if that's what's happening. I want to be clear. I'm probably going to annoy everyone with a lot of caveats. I'm not diagnosing, and I'm not saying that she's abusive. Not because I want to avoid a lawsuit, but I literally believe it to be true that I don't know because I'm watching an edited TV show. Also, I'm terrified that as I go out on a limb with some of these parallels that I'm drawing, that someone will claim and pull out of context a clip of me saying things that might look like I am diagnosing or labeling her. I'm not. I wish I should just maybe have something on the screen.
I have been away from you for a total of 3.5 hours. You're acting like I'm extensively partying since you've met me, and I'm not. That's not me. And now you're questioning whether I'm lying.
Do you not
understand? You told me that I was...
I'm sorry. Do you not understand this?
And he's defending himself, and it sounds believable, but I don't know. And then now, without listening, because he's trying to respond to what she's saying, you could argue he's over-talking too, I suppose, but at least his responses are in light of what she is saying. He's directly addressing what she's saying. When he has sufficiently addressed it, she'll just shift, not because she's doing it volitionally, but because it feels abandoning and betraying. So her brain subconsciously will figure a justification for her feeling. She'll mold reality to her feeling. And so I think we're seeing that again, and she is now going to attempt to dominate the conversation.
Things I told you in the pods.
Do you not
understand? You told me that I was...
I'm sorry. Do you not understand the situation we're in? Because if you don't, then we're on a way different page.
I don't understand the situation you're in.
Way different situation.
I don't understand the situation you're in.
We don't
Regardless of last night or just the fact that...
I'm interrupting you.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know what to say beyond that. I mean, they're both kind of interrupting each other, so that's not really saying much. But, her body stance, the way in which she's trying to get control, dominance of the conversation. She comes across as a very nice and very accommodating, very sweet person. And you would not look at her and think that she is an abusive person. And it would be hard to watch this for most people and even think that that's what's happening. But I don't know. Sometimes I sell people short. Maybe it is more obvious to people. If it was to you, let me know in the comments well, I imagine to you it would at least be on your radar if you've been watching my channel. You also might know this intimately yourself. You might even be a specialist in this area as a clinician.
Situation you're in.
We don't
Regardless
have,
of last night or
I
just
don't-
the fact that...
I'm interrupting you. Girls from the pods are there, and then I find out you're with your girls. That's not cool with me. It's not cool with me.
Okay. So was he there with other women? But he said, I don't know what Mackenzie looks like. What other, was his friends, he has friends that are women, and they were all real clear about how that's all okay. She did say, I've had boyfriends in the past that had girlfriends, friends who were women who, and then she said, I've always been cheated on. Oh, I was going to talk about that briefly, that normally when we hear someone on the show say, I've been cheated on a lot, we, of course, we believe them. Why would we not? But given her presentation, there's a chance. Now, has she been cheated on? A lot of people have been, so that probably has happened. But there's a chance that a good number of what she believes and knows were incidents of her being cheated on, she was not cheated on. The way she's talking about him, imagine if they did break up, how the narrative would completely spin from reality. That's why we call it borderline. In the past, when it was first being observed in the 30s, 40s, 50s, the analysts, the evaluators, the therapists would notice that with some clients that had a lot of emotional volatility seemed to be schizophrenic, delusional. For someone that is, there's a lot of different presentations of psychosis, but one might be that you have someone that, phases in and out of episodes in which they have hallucinations and delusions, like they believe that their therapist is the devil. Okay. That's something that could happen. I had a client once that looked out the window and looked at just some random people on the street and said that those people were FBI agents that were following him, and they weren't. So those are delusions, right? That's psychosis, break from reality. And for the early analysts, they would see this and they thought of it as a form of schizophrenia, because there's a lot of variations of schizophrenia. There's a lot of types and intensities. Sometimes it starts with a little bit of delusion and then you see it go away, and then it gets worse over time, like with bipolar or something. If it's not everyone with bipolar has delusions, but some do. Anyway, and schizophrenia is very noticeable, right? So you can imagine a lot of early people in psychology were very well aware of schizophrenia because it's very obvious when someone has an episode. And a lot of the early work and theory had to do with trying to explain that and treat it and da-da-da. So when this other sort of client comes around that seemingly has signs of delusions, the delusions were always relational, though, along these lines. You betrayed me last night. You lied to me. You don't give a shit about this relationship. And then I know you cheated on me. Okay. So then the analyst is like hearing these, there's a lot of manifestations of that. And the analyst is saying, oh, this person's delusional, like schizophrenia. But over time, they would observe that it wasn't a global delusion. It wasn't in all contexts. Someone who's schizophrenic, they will have delusions when they're particularly, within their episode that is, like if they hear voices, for example, they hear voices all the time. I mean, depending, or they don't only have delusions like, the guy that saw FBI agents out of the window, he doesn't only see FBI agents when one particular person shows up. There's the paranoia and the persecution is in multi-context, in multi-situations. Whereas for these patients, they only seem to have delusions about people they're close to, particularly, their main attachment figures. Maybe the analyst too, but they don't misunderstand their friends or their coworkers or their people that they just know, acquaintances or something. They have no delusions about most humans. It's only people that they're close to. What's going on here? That doesn't make any sense. So they're borderline schizophrenic. They're borderline psychotic. They're on the border between non-psychosis and psychosis. That was the word that stuck. It's a weird word because most people today do not think of borderline as being in between non-psychosis and psychosis. It's perhaps one of the initial observations, but the name stuck, so just know that. But it highlights that one of the first things that's noticeable is that the individual will actually believe, they're not lying, but they will believe things that are just completely untrue. And why do they do that? Well, the model that I follow is that they have such an intense feeling, and they also have a schema that they developed early in life that was based on what was happening, that they actually will reform their memories to comply with their feeling and with their schema. And we all do this to some extent. Like a common example that is more often talked about would be you have a police officer that's racist and against black people because of the indoctrination by society, and rolls up on a crime scene, and there's a black man, suspect, unarmed, and the police officer has a lot more adrenaline than if the suspect was white because of his beliefs, his schema that black people are more dangerous. And so because of that schema, they have an increase in their adrenaline and are much more likely to see threat when it doesn't exist. They reach into their pocket, the police officer pulls out a gun and shoots them. Whereas if the person was white, they would wonder, but they wouldn't just immediately do that. So was the police officer delusional? We wouldn't frame it that way. But you exaggerate that, and you will have something that looks delusional, it'll be borderline delusional, but it's not, we don't characterize it that way. It's just emotional memories. Another example that is way more common is that couples will come into my office having been in a fight earlier in the day, and both of them will have completely different memories and stories as to what happened during the fight. One person will say, and you've all been here, by the way, because so have I, but I'm confident that all of us have a small version. That's the other thing about all personality disorders, including borderline, that it's not like an alien from outer space. People with borderline aren't like a different species of human. They have an exaggerated defense mechanism, an exaggerated process that we all have. So we all have that seed of borderline in that when we're in a fight and we're hurt and we're upset and we're confused and our adrenaline's going, and then we sit down and we both tell the story of the conflict, and one person might say something like, well, you said that, this morning when we were in the fight, you said that you knew that you were wrong. And then the other person, no, I didn't. I never said that. And they believe these things to be true. They're so sure of it. And either one is right and the other one isn't, or they're both wrong. Either way, one or both of them is filtering their memories, which are squishy things and neurons, through their emotions. They're also encoding in the present. They're encoding perceptions through their emotions, and it will be encoded having, especially if the emotion is very intense, it'll be encoded as a corrupted memory, if you will. So she might be doing that.
When the pods are there, and then I find out you're with your girls, that's not cool with me. It's not cool with me.
If it's offending you that I have girlfriends, then that's whole nother issue.
Who were you with last night? Who were you with last night?
Oh my God. I'm not.
Okay, I don't know. You probably know because I'm guessing it all gets fleshed out. But so I think by implication, she thinks that he was with his girlfriends, his friends who were women, and he's getting up and walking away. Some people would call this stonewalling. it's not exactly stonewalling. It's more, well, it could be, it depends on your definition, but it could be even healthy for him to do this. The healthiest response is, I need a break. You know, we talked about this in therapy. I need an hour or a half an hour to calm down because I'm starting to lose control of my emotions. And we all understand that when that happens, we don't operate from a place of groundedness. And I probably won't be able to hear you. I'm certainly not going to be able to say things that are going to be functional. So I need a break. So he could be doing that, or he's obscuring some guilt that he has. I don't know. They established that he was only gone for an hour. So even if his friends were there, now I could see a scenario where his girlfriends were there and he knows it'll trigger her, so he doesn't want to mention, and has been trying not to mention that, even though nothing happened. And so now he's like, shit, now I have to say that, or I already said they weren't there. I don't know. So I guess we'll find out.
Okay. You're not being respectful to me.
How am I not being respectful to you?
How every day, who do you hang out with? Every single day. Where do you go when you're not here?
I have been with you every.
Where do you go when you work?
That's where we're not on the same page.
Okay. I don't know the landscape. Did he do something wrong? Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. It's strange he's not just saying, what are you talking about? No, I wasn't with that group of friends. And even if I was, it wouldn't make a difference. So he hasn't been saying that. I don't know.
Where do you go when you work?
Here.
Really?
Here.
Do you?
I went to my apartment one day. Mm-hmm. I work.
Who do you text all day? Who do you text?
Oh my.
Is she accurate? I can't depend on her narrative because of the things that she has already said in the previous fights, including this one. But she could be honest something. I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
My goodness. If you're fishing for me to tell you that I text my girlfriends all the time.
I see.
If you want to sign up with me, you have to sign up for all my friends too.
It's a respect thing, babe. It's a respect.
I'll take a step back from hanging out with girlfriends if that's what you want.
Right. Now, maybe he's obscuring something, but it kind of looks like he's saying, no, yeah. But plus, even if he did text with, the calling them girlfriends might not help the situation for her, but like, I don't think I would call women that I wouldn't call Rebecca a girlfriend. I just call her a friend. What does gender have to do with a friend anyway? So, like, I don't call guy friends boyfriends. I mean, yeah, if you do, I suppose it's fine. But anyway, so he is, I think, saying maybe I did text. I think he thinks if we get into this detail, then she is going to feel like she will have justification for this whole thing. Because, yeah, I have friends that are women, and yeah, I do text them sometimes. But what does that mean about why are we even, now were they at the thing last night? Because that's what she's saying. Or has she just completely jumped ship? And she's on a different ship because she's done that a number of times.
Babe, it's a respect.
I'll take a step back from hanging out with girlfriends if that's what you want.
But
you haven't asked me.
Yes, I have, but you apparently haven't fucking listened.
When?
Yeah, I tend to believe him. I don't know. I worry that somehow everyone is on her side, or a good portion of you, and you're just like, you're so I would like to think that I am balanced, smart, experienced enough to not just be biased for one gender. Someone said that once in the comment section. Just like, oh my God, you're so biased for men. You just like you'll forgive that, but in context. When I started watching these various shows, I noticed that there are a lot of people that are being triggered. One, and which I get, and two, that there's a tradition of watching these shows in which you're supposed to blast and hate and make fun and ridicule all of them. And if I'm not participating in that, then that must mean that I'm somehow biased for somebody. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, well, I'm not going to blast anybody. Anyway, but I do worry about that, I guess, in this moment, because I'm really But I will say that, like, when I watch the Amber Heard Johnny Depp trial, I can't know anything. But if I were to put my money down, I would say that he's telling the truth right now. But if there was a conversation, so she's claiming that she has asked him to stop or to scale back with his relationships with his friends who happen to be women. Let's rewind that. She claims that she said that and was ignored, but the way she delivered it, it seemed real lackluster. So let's rewind.
My friends too.
It's a respect thing, babe. It's a
I'll
respect.
take a step back from hanging out with girlfriends
But
if that's what you
don't.
want.
But you
haven't
don't.
asked me.
Yes, I have, but you apparently haven't fucking listened.
When? Tell me right now. Do you want me to take a step back?
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. And he, I think, is operating on this notion that if he just keeps pointing out reality, that she'll say, oh, okay, yeah, but it's like a politician. They just skip. She's not doing it on purpose, but it doesn't matter what you're talking about. It's just going to be derailed onto another set of tracks. It's just whack-a-mole. And so if you're ever in this situation, and you can, especially if you start to identify it in between the fights, because it's hard in the moment, you can have, and really a lot of fights are like this in all relationships, but the ability to see it from above and be like, oh, we're not in a zone of rationality right now because of how adrenaline filled we are right now. So trying to debate this is useless. That's not really what's happening. If I talk about content versus process, it's a fundamental therapist skill to pay attention to that. And the content is they're talking about him having spent an hour away last night going to a birthday thing with his friends. That's the content and some ancillary things to that. But that is not really what's being discussed in my estimation. The process is that he's confused and trying. I think he's hurt. I think he's starting to get frustrated and demoralized. And he's trying to express that. And for her, like, he hasn't said that directly, but if he were in his feelings and could communicate that, it might even help. I would imagine it would for him to say something along those lines. And for her, she feels abandoned and betrayed, independent of what's actually happened, I think. And what she wants deep down is not to feel that way. And she probably has no rational way of getting out of that, really. So that's what's happening. She feels betrayed and abandoned, and she's accusing him. You did this to me. You made me feel this way. And the content, the words, and the points that she's bringing up are irrelevant to actually what's happening. It's just like it's like disconnected from that feeling, really, but it feels connected for her.
Of course I do, and I told you that.
I'm not willing to take a step back.
Okay, I think he said I'm not willing to take a step back from my friends. And under normal circumstances, he would have had a more diplomatic delivery. But yeah, you can't ask your partner and demand and emotionally coerce your partner into not having their friends, regardless of the gender. Not under all circumstances, but unless there's some legitimate reason, like your friend tried to kill our kids, or your friend is a bad influence, but even then, really, it's still your partner's choice. You can ask, like, I don't think it's a good idea to have that friend. So that's a good sign. What we want all victims of abuse to do is to not give up their friends, because that's the beginning of the end for the victim.
You're not willing to take a step back.
This is the first you mentioned it, is my point.
Yes, I have. I have said that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah, the shift from the first fight to the second to the third is notable. That he is, in this fight, just walking away, I think knowing that it's not of any use to continue, and there doesn't, well, I guess in the second fight he did eventually get there, but he left. But he might be more calm. I mean, I'm sure he's freaking out on the inside, but he might be less than the second time because he's more just resigned. She is now chasing. Now, she isn't, I mean, he didn't leave, so it's not as triggering to her. But, yeah, I mean, we'll see how this goes. But I was hoping she was going to regulate and reorient, but I don't know why I thought that would happen. There's, even when they're talking the next day, well, she did say that one time that she knows she's sensitive, but it was real brief and seemed to be briefly felt or in a shallow way. Not that she's shallow, but because if she really, so if I'm gauging even close to the mark, down the road of recovery, she wouldn't just say, I'm sensitive. What she would say is, I have relational traumas and complex PTSD or whatever construct she's taught or learns or something. And because of all that, I will misinterpret what's happening when things are happening to make it look like I'm being abandoned and betrayed, and I will overreact, and I will become in a rut of that thing, and I will go on the attack. And I need a lot of help with that. I'm getting help, and I also would ask that you help me in the following ways. And if I am being unfair to you and you need to get away from me, then leave. I don't stop and wait for my feelings. You don't deserve that. That's different than all the entirety of all the things she says, even when she's calm, right? The entirety was, you're a terrible communicator, is what she says to him. And, you know, it's a lot of messages at him that he needs to change. And then a couple minor asterisks of her saying that, you know, she needs to work on her emotions and her sensitivity. But anyway, you are, you know, I mean, that's the way it looks. I don't know. Maybe she's capable of a lot of self-awareness. But given what I'm seeing, I wouldn't be surprised if, like, I wouldn't be surprised even after a year of therapy. Well, I'll just talk about my personal experience. So, and clinical experience, is that people with her profile in times of calm, particularly if they're not in a relationship, they can actually be persuaded to adopt and maybe operate from a mode where they seem to exhibit a fair amount of insight into something that happened in the past, at least in the direction that would seem to have some promise to it, some optimism around it. But as soon as they're back into a relationship, you know, their transference just takes over. It's involuntary. So even though she might, in interviews today, a year later, exhibit some reflection, which I don't even know if that is happening, after the season is over, I plan on seeking out kind of stuff like that. But that wouldn't necessarily mean that she's all good and that it'll never happen again. And we've seen it, you know, Zeneb is actually worth mentioning here too. I don't know, but at least the signs was that she falls in love with Cole. They go to the getaway. The very first day, he wakes up super early. She's still in bed, and he sneaks out and goes to the gym, and he comes back, and he, in his kind of oblivious way, is, I think, perfectly pleasant. I don't know. We heard a lot of accusations from Zeneb about that morning, but nothing seemed to be concrete. But she definitely felt like he completely abandoned her and betrayed her and blew her off. She didn't identify anything particular. And in the end, he's just like, I didn't want to bother you because you were asleep. I felt like I was doing you a favor by being quiet because it was so early in the morning. I didn't want to wake you up. I thought I was being courteous. And, you know, she was just convinced that he had betrayed her. And there were other moments kind of like that, right? Like with the cuties moment, actually, she told a story, right, that he had just completely body shamed her. And then the producers of the show, after the reunion, showed the scene. And, you know, the scene, I suppose there could be a variety of interpretations, but I think the consensus among the vast majority was that although you could call Cole a bit uneducated or unaware of how some people, and maybe everyone, might be sensitive to the kind of some of the things that he says, that when you look at it, it was not even close to the way she characterized it. I mean, she was identifying that. I remember now, she was like, let me prove to you that he's a horrible person. Let me give you one of the stories. And so she's not incentivized in that moment to only give a mild story. She's really trying to go for a home run, and she remembers that story to be horrible. And it at the very least, it wasn't horrible, right? And might even just be completely innocuous to most people, Anyway, so I don't know, but it is a tick in the hypothesis evidence column of the reworking of the memory based on a schema and a relational trauma that is operating in the present, because she might have been very betrayed and very abandoned when she was young, and might even have been particularly around body and food and that kind of thing. And then when she's with him, the slightest possibility of interpreting something in that way, she interprets that way and she blows it out of proportion, and then it ruminates, and then it becomes the truth. And then it feels very horrible, because when you think that your partner would do that to you, you're very hurt. Of course you are. But the memory and the perception is distorted. It could be completely invented, or at the very least, it's very exaggerated. So, we can add her. And I hate that my 3 examples on this show are women, because, a lot of research will say that of the people diagnosed with borderline, 2/3 identify as women. But a lot of other research will, and I ascribe basically to this finding, that because of the bias of the evaluators, people with borderline, men with borderline, will often be characterized as either not having borderline or having narcissistic personality disorder. When if you just looked at the behaviors, and behaviors can, these disorders can at times present a little differently depending on gender socialization. But we can imagine that being true, right? Because of bias and of assumptions. One detail of this is that when you have a male client, who is very sure of himself, the way someone with borderline might present, and can be controlling and maybe verbally abusive, for whatever reason, clinicians tend to assume that that's narcissism. When in my book, depending on more presentations with evidence of abandonment, and honestly, borderline and narcissism in a certain way could be characterized as the same disorder with just slightly different flavor differences in the trauma and the defense, but they basically are operating from the same place. They have a lot in common, honestly, that I won't go into. But so I'm trying to think if there's an example from this show of a male that might have had signs. I mean, the problem is with men that they might be operating from the borderline trauma, but they might be socialized to run away. Oh, actually, Carlton, Diamond and Carlton, he was briefly on season 1, right? So he meets Diamond, they become engaged to go on the getaway, and he discloses that he's bisexual. And later she would say it's okay that he's bisexual, but she wasn't really clear on that. At the very least, she was being clear that she felt hurt and concerned that he had lied to her, which I think a lot of people would be. And now, on the other hand, there's a lot of biphobia that would cause normally good people that would never lie or obscure something about themselves resort to that because of worries of literal murder, I suppose, but at the very least, mistreatment or being treated unfairly. Anyway, so the way that Carlton reacted, well, no, that doesn't fit, because I think he just has a tough guy persona that he resorts to when he feels like he's. It's slightly. I mean, that's just the first person that I thought maybe. Well, I suppose Matt from season 3, Colleen and Matt, you remember Matt would see betrayal from Colleen where it didn't seem to exist, and he would get intimidating. He would become unglued emotionally. So I think Matt is a good candidate for adding to the group of people that I would say if they went to therapy, it would be worth exploring this construct of borderline. Okay, well, let's adjourn there, shall we? And everyone, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.